One's ready. Go!
Hey, everybody. You know, it's not every day that you get taken to a clinic like the Kansas City Chiefs did from the Eagles. But today, in this episode, Trent and I got taken to a clinic by Erik Grohmann. He is a registered dietitian or certified dietitian. I don't know which one it is, but he works for Modern Athlete Strength System. So if you go to our website and click on our partner discounts and you scroll down to Modern Athlete Strength System, or you hit the URL in the notes section of this episode on YouTube or in the audio, you can get our URL straight to Modern Athlete Strength System to get you a discount on either the Warfighter program or the Warfighter Elite program. It uses the Train Heroic app and it's all built in. So it provides you with the workout that you need to do, and you can skip through things and you can, come back later at things, and it'll give you a timeline. It'll give you a way to log your weights and your reps and all that kind of stuff and leave notes. If you have questions about substituting things, you can talk to a strength and conditioning coach right then and there on that. Also, you'll have access to Erik Grohmann, the registered dietitian, on anything and everything dietary requirements. So, it is a phenomenal program. Check it out. Whatever fitness level you're at, they're there for you. And then if you do need to get something else like equipment or any of their other supplements and everything like that, you can still go to Modern Athlete Strength Systems and then use the promo code ONESREADY, and it'll get you a discount on that stuff. But if you're going to sign up for Warfighter or Warfighter Elite, definitely use the URL because it'll work out better with the Train Heroic app. Now, on to Erik. Dude, seriously, an enormous amount of knowledge that he dropped on us. It was tough to keep up at some points, but you'll see me heads down quite a bit with taking copious notes just for myself, but also man, there's some really good stuff in here. So I hope you enjoy. I hope you get an education out of it, and I hope it helps better you in some kind of way, because there are definitely some of these things in here that you would think I would have known throughout the years, but sometimes it's good for a reminder because, man, it's just a lot of these things you just tend to forget, or you get out of the kind of good planning rut. It's just like working out. If you get out of a good fitness routine regiment, it can be tough to get back into it. So it's the same with doing the diet stuff. And then, you'll almost get an excuse to eat Snickers from this, believe it or not. So there you go. Enjoy the episode. Please engage with us in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Erik will be in the comments to answering questions, stuff like that. So if you do have questions, hit them there. And if you're already part of the Modern Athlete Strength System family from our URLs, then you can talk to Erik direct in the chat. All right. Later. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the ONESREADY podcast. You're in the team room. Trent and I have a returning guest. Thanks for coming on. Erik Grohmann, registered dietitian, U.S. Marine Corps, and overall, Semper Fi. Yeah.
Oh boy.
And then also, you are you the only dietitian for Modern Athlete Strength System?
Yep.
So
for now.
Yeah, for now. So anybody that's out there that does decide to use the URL, our link to get there, and you have dietitian questions and nutrition questions and stuff like that, like, you were talking to Erik. So, dude, welcome back to the podcast.
Let's be honest. They hired Erik, and then they were like, do we really need more of this? Like, are all dietitians like one is more than enough? You know what I mean?
I'm sick of this guy telling me to eat fucking fiber, man.
Yeah.
It's getting annoying at this point.
We're getting our fill, that's all right. Just kind of
literally.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. Well, I told you what we kind of wanted to chat about, because we get a ton of questions about nutrition prior to the pipeline, while in the pipeline. And although, we've given our own advice, like what I did, hey, occasionally you're going to eat large Papa John pizzas, all to yourself.
Yeah.
You're going to wake up in the middle of the night and, throw down bags of chips and cookies and stuff like that. Probably not the best advice, but maybe it was at the time and it worked for me.
Yeah, and like, not to cut you off, but in most cases, you're probably not too far off, especially when you're in that sliver of time that is the selection process, right? You are burning and expending so much energy throughout the day that, and we'll talk about it a little bit. I always talk about overall performance in a hierarchy. The performance nutrition hierarchy is what I call it. There's other versions out there. The base of that pyramid, and we touched on this briefly in the last podcast, but the most important thing for anybody to perform their best is just meeting their daily energy requirement, right? Like a car needs gasoline, our body needs input. It needs a fuel source to actually perform. So when you're in a selection process, any opportunity that you can to eat, just getting those calories in is by far the most important thing. Again, in the grand scheme of things, depending where somebody's starting out, the selection process is a relatively short window of time. The process leading up to selection can be a larger window of time, right? In terms of preparing yourself. So let's say you're a 16-year-old kid listening to this podcast. You think you want to go Air Force Special Operations. You know you're going to be going through a selection process. Now's the time to get your nutrition and fitness dialed in so that when you arrive for T-Day 1, you are as ready as you can possibly be, not just physically, but mentally. And nutrition plays a role in all of that. And we can get into the weeds about like which aspects nutrition, impacts.
Yeah.
But going back to the selection process itself, yeah, I mean, it sounds crazy that like, man, eating a Papa John's pizza could be the correct thing to do, or a bag of chips. Now, of course, like if you wanted to get into the weeds and make sure your macronutrient distributions were spot on, blah, 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 sure, we could probably have better options. But again, going back to that hierarchy, just making sure you have enough fucking energy is crucial to get you through the next day. People have a misconception about energy, and this is something I spend a lot of time educating my clients on. People think coffee, right, and pre-workout gives you energy, right? Which is not the case. It just helps you kind of stunt that fatigue, and it gives you a little mental alertness. But actual fuel and food input is going to give you that actual energy, right? And that's something I see big time with. If I had to make a general statement about what I see most people's diets look like in terms of athletes and people in the military, law enforcement, especially men, overemphasis on protein and an underemphasis on carbohydrates. And I think that's just a guy thing, right? Like, I want to eat a big fucking steak, and if it's green, that's fucking rabbit food. Get that off my plate, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's pretty typical. I mean, I grew up in a German family, so like meat being the center of a plate, like that's how I was raised. I get it. My dad was that guy. He's like, fucking vegetables are rabbit food. So you see that translate then into athletes, which is unfortunate because they don't get the proper education on what actually derives energy. They don't know that carbohydrates are the body's preferred fuel source. Going back to a Papa John's pizza with an entire crust, you're getting ample carbohydrates. You know what I mean? So yeah, so not a terrible strategy. Not a terrible strategy.
Okay, well, how do you find out what your daily energy, requirement is?
Yeah, so there's 4 things that contribute to anybody's total daily energy expenditure, or your TDEE, okay? And each one of those 4 components we can leverage to our advantage, especially if you want to reach a body composition goal. So the first one that makes up more than 50% of your BMR or your RMR, depending what you're looking at, is, of the TDE is your BMR. Okay, so 50% is just what it takes your body to survive if you were just to sit still and be sedentary all day. So think heart pumping, brain operating, kidneys filtering, liver detoxifying, things like that. That is 50% of your total daily energy, okay? Now, that is the part that we can leverage the least, meaning we don't have much control over it. It's just your body's way of living. The only way it can be leveraged, technically, is by having more muscle mass. Because muscle mass is metabolically active tissue, it burns calories even at rest, right? And it's really all the micro movements like twitching or fidgeting. You're burning more energy than if that same mass was fat mass, which is not metabolically active tissue. It's just sitting there. But nonetheless, aside from having more muscle mass, that is the only way you can leverage your own BMR, unless you like are, Wim Hof and you can make your heart beat faster just sitting there. You know, you can control all these involuntary movements. So that's part one, BMR. The next three, pretty leverageable, but I'll get into like the middle ground one next. That is the thermic effect of food. So the food choices you make impact how many calories you burn, which is why protein is always on weight loss diets, because protein has the highest thermic effect, meaning it takes the most energy to metabolize protein. Okay. But again, outside of maximizing your daily protein intake while still staying within your caloric window, we only have so much leverage. Most athletes, if they're not endurance runners, are pretty much already leveraging their protein to the max. They're doing the upper end of the recommended range, which is like 2.2 grams per kilogram, which translates to 1 gram per pound. If you're doing that, you're eating about as much protein typically as you can. Okay. Otherwise, if you want to look at the acceptable ranges, it would be 35% of total calories. So if you're at that limit, you know you're leveraging the thermic effect of food. The only time we see protein intakes go higher than that are for intentional weight loss. So if an athlete, let's say it's a football player, let's say he wants to recomp his body, we're going to do that off season, okay, as to not hinder his performance during building up to the season and then actual season play. So then we can manipulate, we can put that individual into a caloric deficit. We can bring their protein all the way up to like 2.5 grams per kilogram body weight. That is going to leverage the thermic effect of food even more. But in doing so, we get into this tricky spot, because if you're putting protein that high, guaranteed carbohydrates and fat are going to be bottomed out at the low end of their recommended ranges, if you can even do that. A lot of times, depending how much weight a person wants to lose or how heavy they're at, you can't even reach the protein goal with still keeping carbohydrates and fat within their acceptable ranges, right? It's too much. So you basically have to go down to the 35% rule. So we're going to say, we're going to max your protein out using that. So 35% total calories is going to come from protein. Whatever that number is, it might not translate to that 2.5 grams per kilogram. It might be like 2 grams per kilogram, just based on your existing body weight. But nonetheless, we know we're leveraging it within that acceptable range. So that's the thermic effect of food. Okay, high protein is going to burn more calories naturally at rest. The remaining two factors of your total daily energy expenditure are the most leverageable. The first one is your planned exercise. So that is exercise activity thermogenesis, acronym EAT. That is extremely leverageable, right? That is how much you're exercising. And then there's another, you know, us in the military, we love our acronyms. So there's another acronym that goes within EAT, and that's FIT, the FIT principle, which is frequency, intensity, time, and type. So all of those things, so FITT, are how you can leverage your planned exercise. You can imagine if you increase your frequency of exercise, you're going to burn more calories. If you increase intensity, you're going to burn more calories. If you increase the time of that workout, going from 30 minutes to an hour and a half, you're going to burn more calories. And then the type of exercise. Obviously, CrossFit for most workouts is going to burn more calories than walking, just like running is going to burn more calories than walking. So you've got a lot of wiggle room in how you want to increase your exercise activity thermogenesis. Nonetheless, even for most people, that still ranges, I think, from like 15 to maybe 30% of total calorie burn. The next part, the final part of the equation, is where most people completely overlook. And that's your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, acronym NEAT. That is all other movement throughout the day. That's getting up to do laundry, washing dishes, going to the store and getting those steps in, taking the stairs instead of the escalator. This is something that I talk to every client about, especially if they have a body composition goal, because it seems so little. It seems like nothing. They're like, I tell them, I'm like, when you go to a grocery store, park at the back of the fucking lot. One, it's not stressful because you're not trying to fight for a parking spot and your vehicle's not going to get smashed by a Yahoo. But you get those extra steps in both ways. You get extra steps going into the grocery store. You get extra steps coming out of the grocery store. And they're like, Eric, that's like 100 steps. And I'm like, 100 steps in, 100 steps out, 200 steps. You do that every day of the week for 4 weeks. That's a month, 12 months, right? Like it all adds up. And if you have that same mindset with everything you do throughout the day, it adds up to a lot of calories. Neat can account for up to 50% of calorie burn in some cases. That's at least what the statistic is. So that is extremely leverageable. That's why anybody that's trying to recomp their body, especially in today's world, just needs to move more. I mean, look at us. We're all sitting down right now on this podcast. We could be standing up. Last podcast I did, I was at my stand-up. Oh,
Jared is standing, and he's actually on a stool as well. So,
I was gonna. Yeah, you're pretty. I see you swivel.
Component. Yeah,
but nonetheless, right? So when we stand, typically people are moving their legs a little bit, shaking things out. That's extra movement. So any opportunity throughout the day, we can do stuff like that. It's going to contribute to total daily energy expenditure. So Jared, I'll give you a recap. So for your TDEE, we've got your BMR, which is pretty unleverageable. It's just kind of what it is unless you have a lot of muscle mass. Thermic effective food, your planned exercise and your non-planned exercise. That is what's going to contribute to your total daily energy expenditure.
Well, then with your, I'm sitting here taking notes. That's why I'm looking down. But
I know I talk fast, so tell me to slow down. Need be.
You're good. Well, at least I've been able to take notes, so that's something for me. But
all right,
for the third one, the eat and the fit frequency, or the frequency, intensity, time, and type. And you talked about doing maybe HIIT or CrossFit or something like that, to where it's a high intensity. But when you start talking about, like, because we've had the mad scientist on, Taylor Starch, and I've really kind of gone into this zone 2 crew kind of thing. Where I'm gonna go zone 2, but I'm gonna go for just longer, right? I'm just going to, okay, instead of doing a 20-minute and I'll still do that kind of 20-minute hit, like just high intensity, but then I'd probably do more of a zone 2 long duration now. And I'm interested, like, is there a difference in fueling for that? Thinking of food as fuel, like, how do I fuel differently for those?
Absolutely. So one common misconception is that the body will switch, like it's one or nothing, right? So like I'm either burning fat or I'm burning carbohydrates. That is not true. Our bodies are always burning the macronutrients at all times, just in differing proportions, okay? Protein being less than 5% always. Your body does a really good job of preserving protein because we store carbohydrates in the form of glycogen, not nearly as much as fat. We also store fat, right? That's the stuff people can see, okay? So obviously we got a lot of it. But we have no internal mechanism to store amino acids outside of our existing muscle tissue, which is why it's paramount to hit your protein goal daily to get at least your maintenance amount, because otherwise the only place your body can source amino acids for survival is from your muscle tissue. And your body obviously has evolved to preserve that as long as possible. So it really works hard to not burn your muscle mass as usable energy. Excuse me. So, sorry, Jared, repeat the question. I got lost in my own head.
Do I need to fuel differently? Thinking of,
yes. Okay. I remember where we're at. Yes. For different types of exercise
or long duration zone.
So
2.
First of all, intensity matters. So the higher intensity the exercise, the more you're going to burn carbohydrates. Okay. And it gets real, like we're talking upwards of 90%. Okay. If it's really intense exercise. And the reason that is the mechanism in which your body can metabolize both carbohydrates and fat into energy. So the analogy I use with clients is carbohydrate metabolism is like an interstate highway. Okay. It's an efficient, fast system. Fat metabolism is typically like a bumpy dirt road. Okay. Both will get you from A to B, but obviously the interstate highway is going to get you there faster. And that is all related to oxygen. So when we have less oxygen, okay, we switch more towards carbohydrate metabolism. And when we have more available oxygen, so lower intensity exercise, we burn more fat. Okay. Depending how long the duration of the exercise is, that will still shift. If you start getting to super long duration, hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, you're going to start, even at lower intensities, you're going to start burning more carbohydrate. Okay. But if it's within an hour, yes, typically like that zone 1, zone 2 work is going to burn more fat. Now, not more than carbohydrates, depending on the individual, but it'll burn more relative to you at a higher intensity. Does that make sense?
Right.
Everyone's fat burn zone is different. There's a lot of factors that go into it. Is it a trained individual? So has this person been training for 20 plus years? They're very fit. Or is it somebody that's like fresh off the block, never worked out a day in their life? That will impact at what intensity their body's going to switch into burning more carbohydrate versus burning more fat. And that's somewhat related to how their body takes in all that oxygen. How much oxygen is available to be used for these different metabolic pathways? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Kind of.
I know. It does get a little confusing. Put it this way. You can, to make it really simple, if it's going to be high intensity work where you're breathing really heavily, you're going to be burning more carbohydrates. Okay.
Yeah.
If it's low intensity zone 2 work, for the most part, for most people that aren't endurance runners, you're going to be burning a higher amount of fat than you would be if you start jumping into, your lactic threshold or higher. So we're talking, zones 4 or 5. So the orange and red, if you want to use color coordination. But yes, so both fuel sources are being used, but typically for performance, carbohydrates are going to be your bread and butter. That is what's going to fuel that exercise. And what's really important to note is that, again, you're always burning some degree of carbohydrates and fat, even in those low intensity zones. We have much less glycogen than we have body fat. So that glycogen gets burned through really quick. And as soon as you're done exercising, because again, carbohydrates are the body's preferred fuel source, your body's going to want to replace that glycogen immediately, right? Because it doesn't know that you just exercised formally, right? Our bodies have evolved for survival. So your body just goes, holy shit, my reserve fuel tank is empty. Like, let's start replenishing that. Which is why, again, this is a very common theme with athletes, is that post-workout, everyone always drinks their fucking protein shake, 20, 30 grams, like I'm fucking on it. Everyone neglects, not everyone, okay, this is just a generality, but they neglect carbohydrates. But what your body's really wanting to do post-workout is not rebuild muscle tissue. It wants to replace that glycogen first. In addition to that, another reason why carbohydrates are important post-workout is that you will get your body to secrete insulin as soon as you ingest carbohydrates. Natural process, right? That insulin is an anabolic hormone that we create, and that insulin will allow your body's cells to have amino acids diffuse into the cells easier. So your cells will accept those amino acids for muscle building and repair more so with that insulin present, opposed to if you just consume protein outside of a workout. So these are minor nuances, right? This is like a timing thing, okay? You can, of course, still survive and perform if you were to just drink that protein shake. But when we're talking about top-tier athletes and wanting to perform your best, all these little things do end up making quite a big impact and a big difference, especially if your timeline is condensed and you don't have a lot of time to get in really good shape. Then everything becomes more important.
Yeah.
But
wasn't it Matt Frazier? Is that his name? The CrossFit dude that said as soon as he finished a hard workout, he'd eat a Snickers bar and drink a Coke. And people were like, "You're like a high-level athlete. What are you doing with this poison?" He's like, "This is what my body wants." Immediately after burning myself to the ground.
For sure, and like candy's a good choice, and it seems so counterintuitive from like a health perspective to be eating shit, right? But there's two parts of candy. Okay, I'll make this really brief. Okay,
I like
the carbo. Go ahead.
I like candy. So
Me too. And that's why, that's literally the only reason I exercise is so I can eat some shitty food, some fun food, right? So from a carbohydrate perspective, candy is awesome because it's using refined table sugar, which is sucrose, okay? That's a disaccharide. So that's 2 sugar units, 1 fructose, 1 glucose. Our bodies can only absorb so much of either of those at any given time. So for glucose, let's say it's like 0.8 grams per minute. But when you consume both together, fructose and glucose, we can increase our carbohydrate intake to like 1.8 grams per minute. So mixing sugars is really important. That's why if you look at any athletic product like carbohydrate solutions in powder form or Gatorade, they're using combination sugars. It won't be exclusively glucose. It won't be exclusively fructose. That's the same reason why consuming strictly fruit, if you're like trying to be healthy, or fruit juice before a workout isn't great either, because your body can take in only so much of that fructose at any given time. Making candy a great source pre-workout, intra-workout, and post-workout. And yeah, so he did the soda with the Snickers bar. There's a lot of bodybuilders that, you know, post videos like eating candy, like gummy bears while they're in the gym. And a lot of my clients are like, dude, what's the deal with that? Is that acceptable? From a carbohydrate perspective, absolutely. If you really want to get deep into the weeds about is it healthy and you want to talk about food colorings and all the additives, that's a completely separate conversation, okay? The science on that, the jury's still out. We don't really know. You know, most of the research on these food dyes and additives, it comes back and it says it's probably safe for human consumption. Even as a dietitian, I'm hesitant to fully believe that science. You know, I mean, I trust the research that says it's safe, but at the same time, intuitively, having all of these things that are created in a laboratory, not coming from nature, it does seem like it might not be the healthiest thing in the world. So even myself, when I go all out and eat these things like candy, I still limit my intake. I'm not eating it all the time. In fact, for most athletes, we do have this window to eat these fun foods. Papa John's pizza while you were in selection, candy during, after, before a workout. That's all fun and, you know, games. But that's because we're burning more energy than a sedentary person. So even athletes still have the same goals to meet. We still should be consuming our servings of fruits and vegetables, our whole grain servings to get our total fiber intake, right? And all these phytonutrients. We just have more calories to work within because of our exercise. And those extra calories then can be spent on empty calories, things like sugar, because sugar gives you nothing else, right? If we just look at sugar in its most simple sense, like just pure refined table sugar, all you're getting are calories. There's not going to be any extra benefits. Whereas if you eat an apple, okay, you're getting the fructose, you're getting the carbohydrates, but you're also getting water, fiber, vitamin C, okay, all these other nutrients along with those calories, okay? So most of our calories, especially carbohydrates, should be coming from these whole food sources, okay, throughout the day. But in the training window specifically, we've got room for that fun stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think where people get confused is we talk about this stuff, and I brought up like the highest level CrossFit athlete, right? It's like, oh, post workout, he drinks a Coke and eats a Snickers, like, but not everybody is there. And I kind of like wrote down what I think the 4 phases that our people are going through. Like if you're that 16-year-old kid and you're like, hey, I want to be Air Force Special Operations, and you're not an athlete already, you kind of got to go through, and I wrote this down: baseline, build, perform, which would be your like selection course, and then recover. And I think what messes people up is they don't know when to switch from one nutrition strategy to the next,
Sure.
To accomplish those goals. Or at least that's what would have messed me up. Because if I'm eating like I'm in selection, or I'm not in selection yet, you know, and I'm still living with my parents, that's probably not ideal to get me ready for selection. And so could we like kind of like walk the dog on this? Like if I'm coming off the couch and I'm starting, like my workouts are probably not hard enough. Correct me if I'm wrong. My workouts are probably not hard enough if I haven't been doing this for a while to warrant the amount of sugar and all this other stuff immediately post workout.
Yeah. So a couple things to note, right? Obviously, we're trying to use generalities, but it's tough. Are you an individual that was a high school football player that's really in shape, that works out all the time? Or are you somebody that played Call of Duty a bunch, is completely out of shape, and you thought that shit looked cool, and now you want to join, right?
Look, football players are not in that great of shape. Let's just put that out there, okay?
Fair point. But yeah, so is it a trained individual or not? That will make a difference. You know, where you're coming from a training standpoint will definitely play a role. But you're absolutely right, okay? Let's just say, we'll just say like an average person that's somewhat in shape, okay? You want your diet to be as squared away as possible leading up to selection, because during selection, you're going to focus on that bottom of the pyramid. Like, I just need to eat and get my fuel in, and that's what you're concerned with, because you don't have as much control. Going into selection beforehand, you have a lot of control, okay? So you want to get things dialed in as possible. If your body composition's at a pretty good point, let's call it anywhere between 10 to 20% body fat, okay? You've got a decent amount of lean mass, you're pretty squared away. Then we don't have to worry as much about focusing on recomposition, okay? Then you can just focus on all the generic dietary principles that are really good, okay? Am I getting my servings of fruits and vegetables every day? Am I getting my whole grains in? And why I always mention that is because all of those food groups are going to ensure you get your fiber goal. It's going to ensure that you meet your micronutrient goals, okay, your vitamins and minerals. Now, meat and animal products also have micronutrients, so I don't want to, not mention that. But these fruits and vegetables and whole grains are what is typically underconsumed by most people, especially in the United States. All of those foods have differing amounts of different vitamins and minerals, which is why getting a varied diet is super important, okay? So what I try to encourage clients to do, because everyone has their go-tos, right? Like everyone has their favorite fruits, their favorite vegetables, and it's really easy to get stuck in a rut of eating the same meals, like especially bodybuilder diets. One sweet potato, cup of white rice, handful of broccoli, chicken breast, something along those lines. Day in and day out, 2 meals a day. And that's great from a macronutrient perspective because it's really easy to measure. It's easy to stay on point. So like composition in your body, you're squared away. But when it comes to micronutrients, that is not nearly enough variety to make sure that you're hitting all of those little nuanced goals like I just mentioned. So instead, I encourage people, each day, try to switch up your fruit serving. So when you go to the store, depending how often you shop, get as many different fruits as you can. Instead of buying a week's worth of apples, buy 2 apples, but then buy 2 kiwis and buy 2 bananas and buy 2 oranges and buy, any fruit that appeals to you. Get it all, store it properly, eat the stuff that's going to perish the quickest first, obviously, and then switch it up each day. Same with vegetables. Go to the store and buy a wide array of vegetables and then get creative in how you're going to implement those into your meals. You got onions and bell peppers, maybe throw those into your omelet in the morning so you can get some vegetables in the morning time. You've got carrots and broccoli, well, put them in a stir fry. And it's really important to get out of these like mindsets of what a food should look like. So for example, if you think of a taco, depending which cultural background you're from, okay, it might look differently, but let's say it's a gringo taco, okay, you're going to have some ground beef with that taco packet, maybe a hard shell. You're going to use iceberg lettuce, some sour cream, like some bullshit, right? But then if you're coming from a Hispanic background, you're going to have some quality carnitas on that motherfucker. It's going to be a beautiful corn tortilla. There might be a small amount of diced white onion and a little bit of cilantro on there and a beautiful sauce, okay? Either a fresh pico de gallo or a homemade hot sauce.
It's not going to be a Tim Walls taco then, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So like it's totally different, right? Obviously, the one I mentioned second is going to have some more vegetables on it. But from a health standpoint, who's to say that you can't? Now this is gonna piss some people off, so I'm just getting everyone ready for that. Who's to say that you can't also, okay, if you have a taco seasoning packet as your flavoring, put some carrots and broccoli, mushrooms in there and add that to a taco, right? It's just a vessel to get nutrition in. And you can season it like a gringo taco, for example. I knew that was going to piss people off.
You're going to get assassinated, bro. Like
I know. I know.
Tacos are a religion, bro. Like I'm in Texas.
Yeah.
Like,
well, there's a time to eat like a proper taco, and then it's like my sole mission is getting into the best shape of my life. I know I got to get my servings in, and that's where food starts to skew. Same with breakfast always being breakfast foods, pancakes, eggs, bacon. Who's to say that you can't eat a chicken breast and vegetables and rice in the morning time? You're not used to that, so it's going to feel weird. But if you're really, really dedicated to hit that macro and micronutrient goal, you got to get out of those confines of your mind and what food is and what meal composition is at what times, and just make sure you get that variety in. So everything's on a spectrum, right? And everyone has preferences. And this is why, as a dietitian, I don't write meal plans for people, because everyone I work with is disciplined, okay, for the most part. So if I put them on a meal plan, I'm confident that they'll stick to it for at least 3 months, okay? And it will achieve the objective that we set out to reach, okay? So if it's a recomp goal, they want to lose some weight, it'll do that. If they're trying to run faster for a marathon, it'll get them geared up for that. The problem is, after that meal plan's up, that individual learned nothing. And most likely half the stuff that I decided for them, like a carrot, mushroom, broccoli taco, they're fucking done with. They're not going to eat that shit. So it's very important to work within your preferences, what you like, and then find ways to get creative with bringing those fruits, vegetables, and whole grains into your diet, okay? So for example, if you're a big rice eater and you need to increase your whole grain intake, whatever rice recipe you make, maybe switch that out for a better whole grain like farro, which has like 6 grams of fiber per serving, opposed to white rice that has none. So if you were just to serve rice on the side of a protein portion and some vegetables, the farro is going to probably be a more advantageous choice than the white rice. It'll have a little bit more protein, higher fiber. It's little things like that. The meal didn't change, right? It's still like a grain, a vegetable, and a protein. It's just you made a better choice for the grain portion. So it's little things like that. So if you're going into selection, getting your diet squared away is very important. So one resource, if you guys want to link to it, that I give all of my clients is the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs has what's called the Athlete's Plate. They've got 3 levels of it. So there's a light training or weight management plate, there's a moderate training plate, and there's a heavy training plate. Visually, it's a great representation. It's taking what they will give to a non-active person, which is like the USDA My Plate or the Harvard Healthy Eating Plate, and they gear it towards athletic individuals for training purposes. So to your point about, somebody kind of coming off the couch going into selection, they're not like probably able to eat as much sugar as like a top tier athlete. They'll most likely be focused in the first 2 plates, like that light training plate or that weight management plate or the moderate training plate. And if you look at those plates, we don't have to do it now, but if you look at those plates, what you're going to see is the portion of color, which will come from your non-starchy vegetables and fruits. Yep, there you go. Beautiful. So we look at that first plate, okay, to the left as I'm viewing it, you can see that half the plate is going to be those colorful foods, vegetables, non-starchy vegetables specifically, because those foods have low caloric input. They're not going to contribute a lot of a lot of calories to your meal, but they are going to give you a lot of vitamins and minerals and a lot of fiber. This is especially important for somebody trying to lose weight because fiber is going to help us feel full longer. When we have a well-balanced meal that has adequate fiber, it will keep you full until your next meal time, but it doesn't contribute a bunch of calories. So in my programming, I just created an example the other day. So if you have a goal to reach 80 grams of carbohydrates, okay, you can achieve that by eating 2 1/3 Pop-Tarts, so 1 pack and then 1/3 of another pastry. That's 80 grams of carbohydrates, or 15 medium-sized carrots. Both will give you 80 grams of carbohydrates, but most people wouldn't even be able to get through the carrots because of how much fiber there is. That is why for anybody trying to recomp their body, those high fiber foods are really a great tool to leverage in addition to your higher protein intakes, because they're not going to contribute a lot of calories, but they will still keep you feeling full. Fiber is underconsumed across the board in our country especially, okay? Because we don't eat enough whole grains, fruits, and vegetables. Unfortunately, that's the not sexy stuff. That's the stuff that doesn't make people money, right? People want to sell supplements or these fad diets because 1, it goes viral on social media, and 2, the supplements make them money. No one's getting paid to be like, hey man, did you get your dark leafy greens in? Did you eat that, your servings of fruit? It's just like there's no monetary benefit to it, but that's the shit that really works, okay? And doing that day in and day out at each mealtime is really important. But I do want to make a point that even somebody that doesn't have as much of a training background can still get away with eating some junk food as long as it's within that training window. So let's just call it generically an hour before you work out, during the workout itself, and up to an hour after the workout. This is important to mention because most people have a sweet tooth or, a hankering for some less healthy options without restricting. So as a dietitian, I'm big on not restricting yourself, because what evidence shows us is that when people restrict, they will eventually go and eat those foods. And when they do, they binge on it. Yeah. And they fucking, they just bomb their progress. Okay. So if you allow people to small doses of those foods that they enjoy, they do a lot better at being consistent throughout the week. So if you're like, man, if you got a sweet tooth, like you can have a couple gummy worms right after that workout or before, right? You can get your sugar fix right around that training window. Then you're accomplishing 2 things. 1, you're having that individual no longer restrict, which is really important mentally. 2, that sugar will be used up. So what the studies show us is that, and human physiology, okay? There is only 2 ways to clear glucose out of our bloodstream, okay? This is why sugar gets a bad rap, because of the type 2 diabetes epidemic we're in. Yeah. If you do not move your body, the only way for your body to clear that glucose is through insulin, okay? So insulin acts like a key that's going to open up a door on the cell to let the sugar leave your bloodstream and enter the cell. The other key that allows glucose to enter a cell is exercise. So we see this in study after study that you can have a high carbohydrate intake and your insulin does not spike any more than it would, if you were not exercising. Or I mean, if it doesn't spike anymore because you're introducing carbohydrate. Your body's clearing that excess glucose just because of the exercise itself. Whereas if you were sitting around doing nothing, your insulin's going to spike really high because, again, that's the only way to clear that high volume of carbohydrate out. So even people that aren't as trained as a professional athlete, they can still get away with consuming a decent amount of carbohydrates. And there's another factor to look at. When an individual, trained or untrained, properly fuels a workout, typically they work out harder. So they're going to burn more calories just because they're outperforming themselves if they were to not fuel properly. And that's where a lot of people come to me and they're like, well, what do you think about fasting? Like intermittent fasting or fasted cardio going into it? Well, what that research shows us is that an individual that fasted prior to a workout versus an individual that is fueled going into a workout, they'll have like a net even calorie effect because the person that fasted, they had no input. So they're starting at 0, but they didn't train as hard. Whereas the person that, let's say, starts at like 300 calories, well, they probably worked out harder and they burn that excess energy in their performance. So from a long-term weight loss perspective, both groups achieve the same weight loss goal. Okay, unbeknownst to the individuals that are fasting. And that's a really important concept to understand is we want to perform our best. This is something I touched on during that last podcast, but if let's say you're awake 16 hours a day and you sleep 8 hours in an ideal circumstance, something now that I have a kid is far gone for me. But let's say you get 8 hours of sleep and you're awake for 16 hours. Most people's training window is an hour or less, okay? That's 1/16 of your day. And then most people are sedentary unless they work construction or a very active job. So man, that hour sliver is super important. You want to get the most out of that, right? So going into it, you want to perform your best. You want to give it 100% each and every day. And that's why fueling going into the workout will help you push through and give it that 100%. But immediately following the workout too, you need to fuel properly so that you're fully recovered. So when you go into day 2, you're ready to go. If you fall short in your recovery, you're going to go into day 2 at like 90%, right? And then if you fall short again, you're going to go into the next day at 75%, so on and so forth, down the week till you're just fucking smoked by Friday. And then you're in the gym checking boxes. You're like, oh God, all right, I got to do this set or I got to jog, but now your intensity of running's lower because you're just trying to fight through it. We want to avoid that. We want to give every day we're working out 100%. And that is, again, why an individual, even if they're a little untrained, can benefit from having those less than desirable foods, even during their exercise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, we run into that, we'll see it in the pipeline all the time where I used to really get after the students that wouldn't eat in the morning or were just like still doing their bodybuilding, body composition diet once they got into the pipeline. And I'm like, bro, like you can't be doing that. Like you need to have licky chewies on you at all time, especially if you're like rucking or doing all that other stuff. You need to eat everything possible. Like you're going to have a 6-pack. It's not up to you. You're going to have a 6-pack if you keep going in this process. So like, I think if we're going through this, the baseline is like getting down to that 10 to 20% body fat and training a little bit right before you can start.
Yes.
And then you have all that time before the pipeline to really be disciplined, to build out the way that you should and to learn how your body performs. The performance part in the pipeline, like we said, like you're burning everything. So like there's some things you can do to maximize and be more efficient, right? But like it's not all candy, but like you're there to survive. And then the backside of that, and that you started talking about that, and I really appreciate that, is the recovery piece. Like, and then Peaches had a great story when he was in doc or pre-dive dive school, where he wasn't getting enough recovery food, right? Like, and we don't think about it, especially as kids. Like, we're like, oh, I'm eating healthy, I'm eating as much as I can during these prescribed times and these prescribed foods that I'm getting from the chow hall because it's breakfast food, this is dinner food. And his, cadre was like, you need to wake up in the middle of the night and eat, bro. Yep. So like I think the more you train, the more like all these things kind of make sense to you. But a lot of these folks coming in the front door don't necessarily understand that. So that recovery aspect, I don't think we can hit that hard enough on how important it is to get that stuff back into your body so you can go again tomorrow. Because we've all seen people fall off the cliff, when Jared almost fell off that cliff.
For sure. So let's hold that thought on recovery and let's go back to that getting ready for selection phase. Okay. if you're an individual that needs to recomp their body, okay, so you want to achieve that range, let's say 10 to 20%, keeping it really wide for body composition, you have to go back to what we discussed with your total daily energy expenditure, okay? You have to determine what your body needs starting out, okay? If you're going to go into a deficit, it would be really good to know what your maintenance level is, okay? Then you establish a deficit. So the way I do deficits, twofold. If you're a performance individual, okay, so somebody on a sports team or where you really can't risk, falling short in performance or leading to injury, I always do bracketed adjustments by 300 calories, not 500, because it's just a little safer, okay? If somebody's doing a 300 calorie deficit, most likely they're not going to get so low that they're underperforming or leading to an injury risk. If you're somebody that's like just doing a basic workout, 5 days a week, it's not that strenuous, and you're really trying to recomp, you can get away with doing a 500 calorie drop per your bracketed adjustment. And most likely you're going to be fine. I mean, if you go into the gym for a resistance session and you're just like, I'm just not feeling it today, I probably underate, and you feel like that consistently, you can always bump back up, but it's not like you're going to be there and it's like, I lost the game because I was underfueled, right? So there's a difference, especially if your main goal is composition. You can afford to drop a little bit. The other really important factor in determining your energy needs is that the way we calculate it, okay, there's 3 ways. I'll just go through it really quick. The gold standard, the way that nobody actually does because it's only done in laboratory settings, is called direct calorimetry. This is where an individual is in a sealed chamber and they measure temperature change in that body. That will tell you exactly what your body is burning in terms of energy. A tier down from that is indirect calorimetry. That's like a machine that puts a bubble over your head and it's measuring gas exchange, so oxygen in, carbon dioxide out, and it will spit out your RMR, your resting metabolic rate. Pretty accurate. Obviously more of a margin of error than the sealed chamber, but it's still pretty good. Those are mostly found in hospitals or if you're working with a facility that has one. Very expensive, a piece of equipment, not something that most people have access to, especially a high school kid on the couch, like trying to join Air Force Special Operations. So then the third way that's most commonly used are predictive equations, okay? Even in the field, this is what we use most times to estimate people's caloric output. There's a lot of different calculations out there. I'd say the one I use the most is the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation. And I can give that to you guys if you want to link it later. Yeah, I know it's a mouthful.
It sounds like a sculptor from Italy.
Yes.
That's what it sounds like.
For sure. So it takes your weight, your height, your age, and it spits out an estimate of what your BMR is, okay? And how they came up with that equation or that algorithm is those scientists, people way smarter than me, they took a ton of data from that direct calorimetry, like thousands and thousands of data points, and they created an algorithm that would get close to that number based on people's height, age, and weight. So you spit out your RMR using that. That's just your metabolic rate, right? The other part that you need to calculate to determine your maintenance calories is your activity level. And this is where we can get a big margin of error, because what studies show us is that most people overestimate how much they exercise. They're like, oh, I fucking crushed it today. And it's like, dude, you burned 200 calories, man. Like, you can't go eat that whole Papa John's pizza. But so people overestimate how much they exercise and they underestimate how much they eat. And they're like, I don't know why I'm not losing weight, man. So being really honest with yourself in determining that activity factor is really important, because it's a coefficient multiplied by your RMR. So any small margin of error that you're off will multiply itself by quite a bit calorically. So it's really easy to estimate your calories too high from the start. And that's fine. Okay. You just have to go through the process then of trying it out and seeing what your weight does, more so than if you were a little bit more accurate right from the start. So I really try to emphasize that to clients is like, let's try to get your maintenance calories as close as we can so we don't have to go through that rinse and repeat so many times. But so you determine what your maintenance calories are. And then, although not always necessary, I personally in my practice find it to be a super helpful tool, is tracking your actual intake. So the app that I use for most of my clients is called My Net Diary. And the reason I use that app is because it is free for users to get the basic version. MyFitnessPal now makes you pay to use all their cool features like barcode scanning and all of that. My Net Diary is free. It includes that, and it still gives you the basics, your macronutrient outputs, total calories, so on and so forth. User friendly. So then what I have people do is we calculate your maintenance calories, and then we put you in a deficit if you're trying to lose weight. That's your new caloric target for the day. We'll get you a macronutrient distribution. So typically if somebody's trying to lose weight, we're going to be at the upper end. So like 35% of calories coming from protein. And that will mean their carbohydrates and fat are typically on the low ends, 45% carbs, 20% fat. And then I send them out into the wild and we track their intake. How close to these targets are you getting? And we watch their weight for 2 to 4 weeks, okay? Because we have fluid fluctuations in our body that can go all the way up to 5 pounds, give or take how big that individual is, right? A really big guy can have big fluctuations. If it's like a guy that's 6'5", 280, 5 pounds of water weight isn't that, crazy of a concept. Whereas if you're like 5'1", $120, okay, if you gain 5 pounds from water, probably something going on there. But we watch weight for 2 to 4 weeks, and then we make any necessary adjustments. What I'd like to see as a practitioner is if you're trying to lose weight, 1 to 2 pounds a week, 2 pounds at most for sustainable weight loss. And then I track that. So if you lose 2 pounds in the first week, might be water weight. But if you're at 4 pounds by week 2, we're probably trending in the right direction. If you're losing a lot more than that, I'll probably bump your calories up, because this is why fad diets and crash diets don't work, is because people lose way too much weight too fast. And the body's like, dude, I am in fucking starvation mode. And there's a whole bunch of physiological things that are going to happen to make sure you keep weight on in the future. So as soon as you get off that crash diet, you're going to put that weight back on. Okay. Like over 90% of people, that's the case. So going back to what we're talking about, you get your maintenance calories, or if you're in a deficit, your target calories, you get your macros figured out, and then you track your intake and you see what your weight does, okay? You follow that procedure until you reach your body composition goal. Now, that's like the mathy stuff behind it. How do we reach those goals while still being healthy? That's where I'll bring an individual to like that athlete's plate. This is what I want the majority of your meal compositions to look like. I want you to also hit your fiber goal every day. So on average, let's just say generically, it's like 28 grams for women, 35 grams for men, at like just a overall generic number. If you want to be really specific, it's 14 grams of fiber for every 1,000 calories. Okay, so obviously at 2,000 calories, that's 28 grams. You bump your calories up, you have more. That's your fiber goal every day. If I tell somebody like an elevator pitch, just go out and try to hit your fiber goal. Hit your protein goal and your fiber goal. It's really easy to remember, like, okay, all I got to do is hit my protein goal. Most people are dialed in there because they're already eating enough protein. The fiber is where people have to learn, and it's a lot of trial and error. But if I tell them just hit that goal, they go out and whatever they're used to eating, they're going to find out really quick using that tracker what's a good fiber source and what's not. And they're like, oh man, whole grains, vegetables, fruit. All of a sudden my fiber's going up. And it's like, and that's why we tell you to eat all of your fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. Okay. So it's going to help you reach that objective. And that's why those visual representations like those plates are really helpful tools, because most people are visual learners. So when they see it, they're like, okay, I can kind of replicate that. I'd say the only downsides to using those plates as an example is not every meal or snack we eat looks like a plate, right? But you can use those same principles with foods that aren't on a plate. So I always use like a cheeseburger as an example. So you could eat a cheeseburger and have a refined carbohydrate, white bun, a meat patty, and a shitty slice of American cheese. By definition, that is a cheeseburger. But if we want to use the plate as a representation, let's say we change that bun to a quality whole grain bun that's going to contribute some fiber. We want to add some color, your lettuce, tomato, onion. Okay, so now we got some vegetables on it. Maybe we take the cheese out of the equation because we know that the ground beef and the meat patty is already it's going to be so high in fat that if you add the cheese, it's just going to bump you up over.
No.
I know. I'm pissing people off. Tacos, now I'm ruining cheeseburgers. Okay. But don't worry, because when you're in the pipeline, you can go back to your fucking shitty cheeseburger. That's fine, because it's all about calories in at that point, right? But again, coming from the mindset of we want to get in the best shape possible going into selection, these things all make a difference. And that's how you take a food that isn't like a typical plate and use the same principles to hit your same goals. That way it's going to be well balanced. You're getting enough carbohydrates, enough fat, and enough protein in each meal. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. But I want to take a quick step back, or maybe it's a deviation. Well, it's not a deviation, but like because we had kind of talked about the difference between fueling for high intensity, fueling for long duration, in the pipeline, I'm doing both. I'm doing both at the same, maybe not at the same time, but I'm doing high intensity first, and then I'm doing long, and then high, and then long, and then long, 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 and then so there's never a like, okay, today's going to be
Yeah,
high intensity. It's like, so
great point.
how the hell do I fuel for that appropriately?
Great point. So, a couple things to keep in mind. I'd say let's start with how fast things can empty out of your stomach. Okay. So, if you have simple carbohydrates like sugar, okay, like a Gatorade or a carb powder, or if you can have candy or anything like a granola bar, something with some simple sugars in it, those are always great pocket snacks that will get you through any activity, okay? Because your body's going to want that immediate fuel. In those cases, always just revert to carbohydrates. Like, I'm going to fuel with carbs, I'm going to fuel with carbs, I'm going to fuel with carbs, because your body's going to digest them relatively quickly. Whereas if you're trying to fuel with protein and fat, it's going to sit in your stomach a much longer period of time. You're going to get a lot of energy from those foods, right? Fat being the most energy dense macronutrient, you get a lot of bang for your buck, but it sits in your stomach a long time. If you go from a slow march where maybe you personally can handle like a high fat meal, like let's say you had some pocket bacon or something sexy like that, okay?
Yes.
If you're just, you're rucking along, but it's at a pretty sustainable pace, you can get away with eating that food and it's not going to cause a GI upset. But if all of a sudden you need to bust into a run, now that food being in your stomach could be problematic. And having GI problems during an event can be really problematic. It could cause you even to possibly fail that event.
Yep.
And that's why those carbs are always a safe choice, because they're your best bet at clearing out of your stomach, entering your system for usable energy at any given time. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And
outside of training, like at night, go for it. Eat tons of high calorie foods, because you've got all night to rest and digest and let those things pass to replenish the energy that you burn that day. But if you don't know what event's coming next, but you know you're going to be moving in some capacity, I personally would stick to carbohydrate options. Whatever is available to you, those are the things you want to keep on hand in your pockets, just to get you through those movements and not risk having a full stomach that could potentially cause a GI disturbance.
Yeah, and for the folks out there, like, you're going to have it. There is going to be a time where you're on a long ruck march, or you're on a run, or you're in a pool, and you have to hop out of that pool and run to the locker room. All the cadre know exactly what you're doing. They know exactly what's going on. Generally, they're sympathetic to it, because we've all been there. But you better not shit the pool. You shit in the pool, like, do not do that.
I feel like that's something you just don't live down.
No, it's not something you don't live down. You might not survive it either, because you're going to get smoked until you quit. Like,
it happens more often than you'd like to think,
Yeah.
I think GI disturbances with most athletes are really common. Like, a lot of people have a hard time digesting food in and around exercise, if not even outside of exercise, right? And that's something I always try to tease out with clients. But understanding how your body will digest food is really important. So, for example, when I work with endurance athletes, something we do to prep for a big endurance event is training the gut. Your gut, being a muscle, okay, can actually train itself like a bicep, okay? You can get better at doing certain functions, metabolizing carbohydrates being one. So if we look at top tier endurance runners that are consuming upwards of 100 grams of refined sugar every hour, some studies bumping up to 120 grams an hour, a normal person off the street, if they were to consume that much carbohydrate during a run, are going to experience some GI disturbances. Their body just isn't adapted to consume that much carbohydrate at any given time. So that could be, going back to getting ready for selection, another thing that an individual might want to consider is during training, even though your body may not need that much carbohydrate, if you want to start experimenting with 30 to 60 grams during your workout, just to get your stomach used to taking in some carbohydrate, it would be an effective strategy, so that when you are in selection, if you just have a pocket full of carbohydrates, you don't have a chance to measure it out, you can just eat a bunch and hope that your body is now a little bit more efficient at actually getting that from mouth to your cells to be used as actual energy to create that ATP for use. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. Yeah. So going back to your question, like, you don't know what event's coming up. I would default to carbohydrates as your pocket snacks. And then outside, when you know you've got some time to actually digest food, just load up on calories, right? Going back to that performance hierarchy, just meeting that energy need. And then something we haven't touched on at all, and we don't need to dive into details, but staying hydrated is huge. Any like 2% mild dehydration is going to negatively impact your performance. So staying on top of just consuming enough water, eating salty foods when you're sweating a lot, that goes such a long way in overall performance. It has to be mentioned.
Well, so
Go ahead.
I was going to follow up with that then, basically, because we just had an event this past weekend where it was just, it wasn't crazy intense at all because it's not a smoke session. It was just kind of instruction. But we had some people in the pool for about 4 hours, and one guy who was extremely muscular, like ridiculous body of Adonis kind of thing, but he was struggling in the pool at right around the 2 hour mark from just severe cramping, like in his legs. And so he was asking me, a non-diet person and somebody who's a little overweight right now, about salty food and that kind of stuff. So like, how much salt should somebody be putting in? I know that's probably a difficult question to answer because it's probably person dependent, but like, how does somebody avoid that cramping?
Yeah. So that's one thing as a dietitian, I'm not everyone's, favorite person, because a lot of times when I answer, I go, well, there isn't an answer. Whereas somebody on Instagram that's like, this is the only way. And if you do this, it's 100% true.
You will die
so, yes.
if you eat this.
Yeah. So when it comes to salt intake, okay, and an overall fluid balance, it is very case dependent. It's very individualized. And there's a couple things to consider. If we consider like an overall health perspective, like if you go way overboard on salt, okay, not only will the fluid balance probably be off, but long-term, higher chance of high blood pressure, okay? If you go way overboard all the time. But when it comes to athletic performance, I'd rather have my people overconsume salt a little bit than underconsume, because they risk all the side effects of underconsuming and going hyponatremic, meaning there's not enough serum sodium to actually get you to perform. So a couple things. One, looking at sweat testing, okay, especially if you are pre-pipeline. You can do two ways, okay? The easiest one to get started is just to wear like a piece of black clothing, go out for a pretty strenuous workout that's going to make you sweat, and then let your clothes dry and see, do you have a lot of white salt rings on your clothing? That would be a pretty good indication if you are a salty sweater. So one thing to note is that people sweat at different rates. So the amount of fluid they lose is different, but also the amount of electrolytes they lose in their sweat is different. So there are heavy sweaters and light sweaters. There are salty sweaters and non-salty sweaters. And then you can obviously figure out all the different combinations. So identifying which you are going into it is really important. But I'd say, generically, if we have to just give one answer, I'd say always salt your food if you're in a training program ahead of time, because that salt will be used up, especially if you're sweating. If you want to take sweat testing to the next level, you could do like a Gatorade sweat patch. That's pretty easy to use, relatively inexpensive. There's an app that will monitor the patch when you're done, and it will give you hydration recommendations. Pretty accurate. You can buy a sensor. Like I just got an H drop. I want to say it was like $250. That is reusable, so I can just wear it anytime, and it will give me immediate feedback on my hydration. Of course, like any tool, there's going to be a margin of error, but it gives you an idea. What I like about the wearable sensors is that I can wear it in different settings without having to buy patches all the time. So let's say I live in Wisconsin, right? So in the winter, I'm wearing heavy clothing, or at least, layers when I run. That still causes me to sweat quite a bit. The cold air makes my breathing lose a little bit more moisture and fluid loss. So tracking my hydration status in the wintertime is important, so I can fuel and hydrate properly during winter. But then in the summertime, when it's super humid and hot, I also want to monitor my sweat loss, because it's going to be likely different than what it would be in the wintertime. So I can mimic all these conditions. I could have 20 different scenarios, monitor my sweat status. Then that $250 doesn't sound too bad, whereas like you're buying these $6 patches over and over again to get the same result. So it's really up to you, but getting somewhat of an idea at least once of what your sweat rate is a good strategy. That way, like, okay, and then you can get used to practicing. Like, all right, I know I should be consuming 500, maybe 1,000 milligrams of sodium post-workout to replenish. But in general, especially if you're in the pipeline, just salt your food if you can. Okay. Because again, the pipeline's relatively short. We're not talking entire lifespan here. If you're going a little bit overboard on sodium, it's probably better than going, consuming not enough and risking cramping, which could cause you to fail an event, or going hyponatremic and having all those negative side effects. In addition to that, right, a bigger individual, especially a super muscular individual, they're going to hold more water than a smaller person, right? Intuitively, because they have more mass. So their hydration needs are elevated compared to somebody less. So you can't compare somebody that's 5'5", $160 to a guy that's 6'2", 250. It's just, they have different hydration needs completely. And that's where it becomes really individualized. And that's where people are like, I just want an answer. Just tell me that I need an LMNT packet and I'm going to be good to go. And I'm like, but it might not be what you need,
Yeah. Well, and so that's kind of what I wanted to follow up with, is just overall advice, and for people that are, and I want to narrow it down. That way it's kind of a more specific question and answer. But people that are preparing for the pipeline, what advice do you have for them in terms of nutrition and hydration? Well, you kind of already hit hydration, but like nutrition.
My biggest piece of advice is educate yourself. Understand what things to focus on, because then when you're in the pipeline, you know what foods to gravitate towards that work for you. That's why understanding carbohydrate selection, like, all right, that's a simple carb. I know it's got sucrose in it because it's added sugar. I know that will digest really quick. Like, those little pieces of education are priceless, because then if you have an option to grab a couple snacks on a table before an event, you know which foods to keep with you, right? And same with, like, at night, you know what foods to gravitate towards at the chow hall. You're like, okay, today sucked. Like, it was a grind. I know what a heavy training plate looks like. I know half my plate is going to be like starchy carbohydrates, be it potatoes, sweet potatoes, rice. Still want to get a little color in there, and I need all that protein for rebuilding so I can build that plate. So educating yourself on what you need to eat, that is the most important thing. Outside of that, of course, it just depends where you're coming from. If you have 30% body fat, well, your focus should probably be recompositioning your body to get within that range, at least going into selection, because what studies show is that you have a better chance of passing if you are in that range of body composition. Of course, I'm sure we all know somebody that did not look the part that passed because they're just fucking hardwired. They're not going to quit, right? And they might have just barely squeaked by performance-wise, but they fucking didn't quit and they made it, right? So, but
talk about me.
there you go, right? And that's awesome. And I'm not saying that anybody can't pass if they're not in that 10 to 20% body fat percentage window, but it will give you one more advantage, so to speak. So yes, to rephrase, educate yourself on knowing what to eat and knowing what's important, and then put it into practice as much as possible leading into selection so that you can get your body to a really healthy point. And by your nutrition being dialed in, it's going to ensure that every time you exercise leading up to selection, you're giving that exercise 100%. So it'll just get you from A to B faster. You can get to A to B at any given time. If your diet's trash, you could still get to B. It'll likely just be slower. Not everybody has a full year to prep, or even longer, right? Some people are like, man, I'm 4 months out, I'm 5 months out. Like, I got to get this dialed in quick. Then it becomes a little bit more important to really pay attention. That's where you're eating those fucking mushroom, broccoli, carrot tacos, because you're like, I don't have a lot of time. I got to get dialed in. But yeah, so timeline's important. But yeah, educating yourself, getting your nutrition as dialed in as possible. So let's talk performance nutrition hierarchy just really quick. I can sum up. So there's 3 tiers to a pyramid, okay? The bottom being the most important, the middle being important but not as important than the bottom, and the top being important but not nearly as important as the bottom 2 tiers. The bottom tier, hitting that energy goal daily, making sure you're actually fueling enough so that you've got enough energy to perform and recover, hydrating properly, and making sure your macronutrient distributions are at least pretty close. You're getting enough protein, you're getting enough carbohydrates, and your fat isn't overboard or way low. Okay, that's the bottom. If you can just do that day in and day out, most likely you're going to perform at a high level. The next tier is going to be getting your micronutrients and hitting your fiber goal. Those are things that if you miss a day or two, no big deal. Your body is an amazing thing, right? Humans didn't evolve having access to every micronutrient and fiber every single day, day in and day out. So you can go a couple days without hitting these goals and not even notice a negative effect. Okay. But you don't want to go too long with neglecting those things. Your body, okay, using the car again as an analogy, needs all those micronutrients. The fuel, the gasoline, are your protein, carbs, and fat. But in order to get from food to ATP, has to go through a lot of machinery. Okay. Well, all the bells and whistles and parts and pieces, those are your micronutrients. Those are the coenzymes and things that make those processes work efficiently. So you don't want to miss out on your vitamins and minerals for an extended period of time. Then moving up to the top tier of the pyramid, that is what I consider the sexy stuff. That is your nutrient timing and your strategic supplementation. So nutrient timing being like, all right, I'm going to have 30 grams of carbohydrate 1 hour or 30 minutes prior to my workout. It's going to be simple sugars. I know my workout's an hour and a half, so I'm going to do 30 to 60 grams intra workout. And then post workout, I'm going to do 20 grams of protein and 60 grams of carbohydrate using a 3-to-1 ratio, and it's fucking squared away. And that's great, right? Like that timing, it does make a difference. It will get you from A to B faster. But if you're not locked in every single day and you're just like, I don't have time to measure or plan. I know I need some carbs and some protein. That's totally fine. Totally fine. It's not game day. Okay. It's okay if you aren't dialed in every time. And the next one is strategic supplementation. Do I need this supplement? Most times, surprisingly, you don't. But there are times where it can be beneficial. So the example I use most frequently is magnesium, because magnesium is really important for athletes and everybody. But it's a nutrient that most people don't consume enough of. So typically what I'll have a client do is we'll do a micronutrient assessment. So I'll bring them to a resource. If you want to link that, it's the Linus Pauling Institute. You can go there and learn everything you need to know about a given micronutrient, a vitamin, mineral, phytonutrient. And conveniently, there's always a list of what food sources are highest in that nutrient. So using magnesium, we go there, we look up magnesium. You go to the food list and you look at, all right, all these foods are high in magnesium. Here's the corresponding amount. And you go, I don't eat any of those fucking foods. And you're like, ooh, okay, now might be a great time to supplement. Or you got somebody that has a really clean diet, very varied. It's like squared away. It impresses me. And they go, oh yeah, I eat that. I eat that much of it. Okay, I do the math. Oh, I'm meeting my magnesium goal. You don't need a supplement then, right? Now, an athlete's going to burn a little bit more, so it still doesn't hurt to maybe top off a little bit, but you don't need a full serving. So something I do personally is my diet does have high magnesium foods. I still supplement a little bit, especially if I'm in a heavy block of training. But like I've got a powder, it's 400 milligrams a scoop. Most times I'm just using like a quarter scoop. Okay. Not only does that make your supplement last longer, but I know I'm not consuming an excessive amount, because one thing that is often overlooked is you can consume too much of certain micronutrients, especially like fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. You don't want to overconsume those nutrients day in and day out, because you could build up a toxicity, which could cause problems. We want to avoid that. That's why it's time consuming. It's arduous. It's a pain in the fucking ass. But if you can go through that little stepwise process I just explained and do a self-assessment, you can find out which nutrients you're probably getting enough of, which ones you're falling short in, and then just strategically target the ones you're falling short in. So then you're not taking 6 different supplements, just trying to broad brushstroke your fucking nutrition to cover all your bases and then risk over consuming, or at best case scenario, just wasting your money. But that's the top of the pyramid. That's strategic supplementation and nutrient timing. If you can adhere to that pyramid most days, especially covering the bottom, you're going to be in a really good place. Whether it's pre-selection, during selection, or after selection, that pyramid will hold true. For the guys going into selection, again, education being the most important thing. Understand what your body needs and how to cultivate a really healthy diet. That will give you the advantage to be in the best shape possible going into selection. It will also ensure that when you're at selection, you know what foods intuitively to focus on. And then if you guys want, let's talk post-selection a little bit. Recovering your body. And this also plays into just your daily workouts, okay? You need to replenish what you burn, okay? Multiple things happen during exercise, okay? One is, depending on the type of exercise, you're going to be breaking down muscle tissue. You're going to break down more, obviously, during resistance training than you are during a light jog, okay? What repairs muscle tissue? Amino acids, okay? So you need to hit that protein goal for repair purposes. Your body uses amino acids for a whole lot more than repairing muscle tissue. And it's going to prioritize all the important things first, opposed to repairing your muscle. So that's why making sure you get enough day in and day out, very important. Again, as a reminder, we don't store amino acids, so you got to be on it daily. From there for recovery, we burn through a lot of energy during exercise, okay? You're going to burn some level of glycogen. So making sure you consume those post-workout carbohydrates to refuel, very important. You need to make sure that glycogen gets replenished. Post-workout, you're on a clock, okay? So everyone's probably heard of the anabolic window for your protein consumption. That has been pretty much dispelled. So in a hierarchy of protein, as long as you hit your goal at any point throughout the day, you're good to go. The timing and distribution of protein is important, but it's a lot less important than people think. So if you want to be totally squared away, yes, take your total protein goal, divide it by how many meals you have, and consume that much protein per meal if you want to be perfectly distributed throughout the day. But don't get too worried about it if you don't do that. And it's like, man, I only ate twice today, but I hit my protein goal. You're like 99% of the way there. You're good. Your body has what it needs. Okay. But glycogen replenishment is on a clock. Oh, I forgot to make a point. Your protein window is like 3 to 5 hours. That's before, during, after workout. So you've got time to hit that protein goal for exercise. Glycogen, on the other hand, man, that first hour, even the first 30 minutes, really important. Your body is in like overdrive to rebuild that glycogen. So when you feed it carbohydrates, you want to give it as much as you can to repair that or replenish that glycogen as much as possible, especially after a hard workout where you think you burned a lot. Because if that glycogen doesn't get topped off, again, you go into day 2, day 3, day 4 with less available energy to be used up. So repair, protein. These are the 4 R's, by the way. I don't think I touched on that. Repair, that's your protein. Refuel, that's going to be your carbohydrates. The next one's rehydrate. Making sure you replace your fluid loss. Every pound you lose drinking 2 to 3 cups of water, making sure you salt your food so you get your electrolytes, maintaining that adequate hydration status, super important for recovery. That's rehydrates. Now we've got repair, refuel, rehydrate. The last one is reduce. This is reducing inflammation. So when we exercise, we create a whole bunch of inflammation in our bodies intentionally. Not all inflammation is bad, but we don't want to have it be so much that it's problematic and it starts inhibiting our recovery process. So a couple things you can do. One, going back to fruits and vegetables, those fruits and vegetables, all those colorful foods have phytonutrients that have antioxidants in them. Those help fight free radical formation that was created during exercise and helps your body reduce inflammation. That's why high fiber diets that have a lot of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains are shown to be anti-inflammatory. Okay, so that's like a whole food thing. The other one is seafood. So eating foods that are really high in omega-3 fatty acids, okay, especially EPA and DHA, those are anti-inflammatory by nature as well. So if you're not a big seafood eater as an athlete and you're not eating it every day, supplementing with an EPA DHA supplement is very important, not only for your overall health and well-being, because those are essential fatty acids, but for reducing that inflammation. And then you can consume things like tart cherry juice, which has been shown scientifically to reduce muscle soreness and fatigue. It's also naturally high in carbohydrates. Consuming things like olive oil that have an anti-inflammatory compound inherent in that food. All these little things that help keep that inflammation into a reasonable level, that is very important. So to just recap the 4 R's for recovery: repair, that's your protein; refuel, that's your carbohydrates; rehydrate, that's your fluid and electrolytes; and then reduce. That's reducing inflammation with all those colorful foods, your EPA, DHA, omega-3s, things like that, tart cherry juice. If you can adhere to the 4 R's after each workout as best as possible, it will ensure you go into your next training session, whether it's the same day or next day, as prepared as possible.
Nice. I dig it, man. Well,
Boom.
you obviously have a ungodly amount of information to get out there. I think we need to bring you on for part 3. But for now, where can people find you on the socials?
So the easiest place to find me right now is through Modern Athlete. If you want to find my Instagram page, it's Grunt Grub. So GRUNT GRUB. That's my Instagram page. So always trying to put out helpful information on there. But if you want to work with me right now, you can go to Modern Athlete. We've got a couple different offerings. From a very entry level standpoint, I've written some basic nutrition guides. I've got a complete nutrition guide that's like really entry level. It covers all your macronutrients, micronutrients, hydration, baseline stuff. Then I've got some more nuanced guides for strength and power performance or endurance performance. And then I've got a meal prep guide on there as well, just to give you some basics to start out. Things like planning properly, how to prep, and then some basic meal suggestions on what foods to be focused on, how to build a big meal composition. They're not recipes, they're more like styles of food, kind of like I was alluding to earlier, because everyone has different preferences. So instead of putting a recipe with 6 ingredients that somebody won't fucking eat, it's more like make a stir fry and here's like 20 vegetables to choose from. Choose 4 of your favorites.
Rock on. I dig it.
So that's entry level. Then we've got Warfighter Elite, which is a subscription-based service. So if you're part of that, you're getting customized training, but you're also in a group setting, and I'm showing up weekly for a weekly Q&A. And now we're starting to implement some kind of like planned lectures. So I'll have a topic to discuss each week. So if no one has questions, we can at least talk about a nutrition topic. And then we've got one-to-one coaching. So right now, the main driver is going to be 90 Unchained, where you're getting nutrition and training, or you can work with just me for one-to-one. So those are all the offerings we got at Modern Athlete. That's going to be the best place to work with me more directly.
Hell yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, everybody, that's Erik Grohmann. Appreciate you joining us. And we're definitely going to have you back. So
well, I appreciate it, guys. It's always a pleasure.
Everybody out there, don't forget to head over to ONESREADY.com. Grab a piece of merch, check out Modern Athlete Strength Systems using our URL. That way they know that we sent you, and there's a discount built in as well. And then leave a review, hit that like, subscribe, notification bell, and then we're out here. Later.
Later, y'all.